You guys know last week I went 5 for 5 technically in best bets. So I got the Atlanta number 8. When I recorded my bets, I got them at 1.5. I didn't bet it on FanDuel, which FanDuel, if you're out there, wants to make a partnership for the official sponsor of this podcast, that's what I use for all my odds here on the Brandon World podcast. I got them at 2.5. They won by 2. I missed by half a point. It's whatever. But again, at the time of the Brandon's World recording here, I did get all 5 of my best bets. I went 12-4 in the money line, as I talked about on Tuesday. That puts me at 37-27 in the money line, as well as 13 for 20 in best bets. Now, if you're wondering how I did last year through 4 weeks, I was 42-22 in the money line, so 5 games off my current pace, but I was 13 for 20 in best bet. So we are currently on that pace. I will say this week, I have never seen as many 1.5, 2.5, 1 point lines than there are this week in the National Football League. And I do add this week when I am betting, I have 3 dogs and I have 2 favorites. So if you're new to this podcast, what I do every single week on Thursday for the National Football League season is I go through all this week. There's 14 games because there's 4 teams on a bye: Philly, Detroit, the Chargers, and Tennessee. What I will do is I will go through each game. I will give you the money line straight up pick. The spread does not matter. What I call my best bets is I take 5 games, I bet the spread on them, and we call them Brandon's best bets. And we keep track on them throughout the entire season. So without further ado, let's get into it. We're starting with Thursday Night Football. We're starting Tampa, Atlanta. And I know I said last week, I'm going to try to stay away from Thursday night games in terms of betting. I'm already back to betting the Atlanta Falcons. Again, I know it's probably not the right choice, but Atlanta minus 1.5, and I got him at 1.5 already. I'm not making the same mistake twice. I just think I know the Falcons, they didn't score an offensive touchdown last week. I understand that. But I think when you look at this game, Atlanta, they beat Tampa Bay twice last year with Desmond Ridder at quarterback and Arthur Smith calling plays. I will get Kirk Cousins. I know it's a short week. I know it's in prime time, but Atlanta is 2-2. Tampa Bay is 3-1. If Atlanta loses this game, Tampa Bay would have the advantage in the end-to-end tiebreaker, and they'd also be 2 games ahead of Atlanta. I think this game means more for Atlanta. I also think, listen, Baker Mayfield is going to play well. I don't think he's going to play as well as he did last week at home against my Philadelphia Eagles. I think Baker has a good week, bad week, good week, bad week. I think on a short week, Raheem Morris, defensive mind, is going to bring some stuff that Tampa's never seen before. I think Atlanta's going to get up on those Tampa Bay receivers the way Philadelphia did not do so. I think it's a high scoring game. I think it's 27-24. I am completely down on Kyle Pitts. Matter of fact, I just literally cut him. Yes, I cut him on my 0-4 disaster of a fantasy team that if I don't win this week, I may have the worst fantasy season of my lifetime. Kyle Pitts only has 3 catches the whole year. Darnell Mooney has turned into their number 1 receiver. I don't know what's going on. They need to get Bijan Robinson the football. They need to run the football. We saw Saquon Barkley had success last week when he did get the football against this Buccaneers defense. Kirk Cousins is a veteran. We got Kirk and Baker. That should be 1L of a fun shootout. Again, I think Atlanta needs the game more, which is why I'm taking Atlanta, and I'm taking them at 1.5. Next game. Technically, the Jets are the road team. Now, this is a neutral site game. This is our first London game of the year, and I find it interesting that Minnesota is favored by 2.5. That means that the game was in Minnesota, they'd probably be about a 5.5 point favor, which to me is a little bit too large on the spread. Listen, I know the Jets lost to Denver last week, but that's the reason why I'm taking the Jets plus 2.5. Yes, I am betting the Jets to not only cover but win. I think this will be Sam Darnold's first loss. I think Aaron Rodgers and the Jets know they cannot have another bad week. They're already a game behind Buffalo, who I think is going to come out and give Houston everything they can handle because they got embarrassed. They got blown out last week by the Baltimore Ravens. The Jets don't want to vote 2 games back in their own division. Devontae Adams is certainly looming, and there's been, some tension there between Aaron Rodgers and Robert Saleh. But I just think the Vikings defense, they showed some cracks. Now, whether that's just they didn't play as hard in the fourth quarter or whether Green Bay actually found something out, time will tell. Sam Darnold to this point has been the MVP of the National Football League, but we do know London games are weird. Neutral site games are weird. And this just seems like a game where Aaron Rodgers comes out to me. He plays well. And I think the Jets get a much needed critical victory. We know Aaron Rodgers does not like the Vikings from his time in Green Bay. I think the Jets get this victory, and Rodgers once again spoils Minnesota Vikings fans. Next game, we got the Browns at the Commanders. And again, this may be a hard over Ed pick. I'm not going to bet it. I got the Browns. They're dogs by 3 points. Now, this line started at 3.5. So money is coming in on the Browns, who you can make an argument had that game won against Vegas, a penalty, called back on the Amari Cooper holding call. The bad clock management at the end of the game by Kevin Stefanski. You could make an argument the Browns could be 3-1. You can make an argument they could be 0-4. Here they are at 1-3. And I just think this will be the toughest defense Jane Daniels will have to go up against since week 1 when Todd Bowles in that Buccaneers game threw everything at Jane Daniels. The Giants defense is good. It's not special. Cincinnati's defense, we know, is not very good. And Arizona's defense does not look as good. So I think Jim Schwartz, he's a veteran defensive coordinator. I think the way the Browns have played the last 2 weeks, they have a bad taste in their mouth. And the Browns, listen, they go to Philadelphia next week. That's going to be, in my opinion, a pissed off Eagles team coming off a bye, desperate to save their season. I think the Browns need this victory, or that locker room could spiral out of control there in Cleveland. So, for some reason, I got a feeling Deshaun Watson plays pretty well, and the Browns come out here with a victory. The next game, Ravens at Bengals. Bengals are 2.5 point dogs at home. Now they're 1-3. They did get their first victory of the year against Carolina, though it wasn't pretty, at least on the defense side of the ball. The Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, those weapons look like they're warming up on the offense side of the ball. Again, this is a situation where I'm going to take the dog. I'm going to take Cincinnati plus 2.5. And the reason why I'm doing it, even though the Bengals have historically struggled to stop Lamar Jackson, is because, once again, in my opinion, Cincinnati does not want to fall to 1-4 and have Baltimore 3-2 and Pittsburgh potentially 4-1 in that division. Now you're already 3 games potentially, or at least 2 behind the sticks in the AFC North, and you would lose the tiebreaker at this point to the Ravens. So this is a situation where a lot like Atlanta, a lot like Minnesota, or excuse me, a lot like the Jets, I just think Cincinnati needs this game more than Baltimore. The Ravens, they obviously, they beat down on Dallas before the comeback. They beat down on Buffalo. Is there a little bit of regression back to the mean here for Baltimore? And Cincinnati and Jamar Chase has their best game of the season against a Ravens secondary who is, I think, good, maybe better than what they were last year, but it's still probably the weakness of their defense. I think Burrow may have a big game here. Bengals win. Now, the next game here. You may think I'm nuts. I'm taking New England. They're 1.5 point dogs at home against the Miami Dolphins, who I don't care if it's, Tim Boyle, Snoop Huntley, Skylar Thompson, Really, even with Tua, they did not look good at any point this season. And the Dolphins are only the fourth team in NFL history to not have a lead at any point this season. They won against Jacksonville, but they got their lead in the final second on the game winning field goal as time expired. So Miami looks bad. Their season to me ultimately looks over. Um, and right here in the case of New England, this is a team that again started out 1-0. They shocked Cincinnati week one. They could have beat Seattle in week two. They've had two disappointing games in a row, back to back with the Jets and the Niners. I think Gerard Mayo is going to get this team to play well. I think it's a very low scoring game. I think that they will find a way to stop Tyreek Hill, to stop Jalen Waddle. And let's face it, the Tennessee Titans defense is not very good, and they kept Miami's offense in check. Whoever that quarterback is has been unable to move the ball. I think that's the case this weekend. I'm taking the Patriots at home plus 1.5 in a weird, ugly game. Sometimes in betting, though, you got to find the ugly games. Bills at Houston. This is a weird one for me. I'm going to take the Texans, and it's weird that they're a 1.5 point dog at home for how good people love the Texans. That to me either shows people are starting to fall off Houston a little bit, or obviously they're starting to fall in love with Buffalo. I think this is a scenario where Buffalo does bounce back. They will play extremely well. This will be a very close game. Josh Allen against CJ Stroud. Buffalo obviously got blown out last week by Baltimore. For Houston, I don't think there's a ton of urgency because of obviously the fact of what's going on right now in their division. But I think the addition coming back of what I suspect will be Joe Mixon after missing 2 games will be huge for Houston. That's one of the differences that I've seen in Houston the last couple of weeks is with, Cam Akers or whoever in the backfield. They have been unable to get the run game going. I think that will help Nico Collins. I think that will help Stephon Diggs. That will help CJ Stroud. Ultimately, I think D'Amico Ryans' defense makes a play on Buffalo as they've not gone deep a ton this year. I think D'Amico's going to force Josh Allen to still be patient and to eventually take some shots over the top. But I think the Texans here at home, this is already obviously their third home game of the year. They had Chicago week 2. You got Indianapolis here, or excuse me, you had Jacksonville here in week 4. I think the Texans, they do bounce back here at home. You got 2 in a row at home. You got to get them here against Buffalo. The Jaguars season down the line, to me, it's telling you they're 0-4 and Indianapolis is 2-2, and yet the Jags are favored by 2.5. I don't know whether it's Anthony Richardson. I don't know whether it's Joe Flacco, but the Jaguars here, believe it or not, at 0-4, they have an opportunity to turn things around. Because after this game against Indianapolis, who they have historically owned, then they go to London for 2 weeks where they have historically played well against the Bears, and that's a winnable game we know, and New England, that's a winnable game we know. If Trevor Lawrence plays well, and if Jacksonville continues their offensive momentum, they don't turn the football over, they have an opportunity to go from 0-4 to 3-4 and get back in this division, and Doug Peterson has an opportunity to save his job. Heartbreaking defeats for Jacksonville against Miami and Houston. They're 0-4. They probably should be 2-2. Indianapolis, big wins against the Bears and Colts at home. I think there's just too much riding on this for Jacksonville. It's a weird game. I'm not going to bet it because I don't trust it, but I think Jacksonville wins at home. Panthers, Bears. Bears are favored by 3.5. I'm not going to bet it because who knows? Andy Dalton, in some retrospect, it's his revenge game against the Bears as he was there in Justin Fields' rookie year. Um, he goes in there against a Bears defense. I think Matt Eberflus is going to coach him up well. But there's a scenario here where, Carolina's defense comes to life. Caleb Williams does not look as good, and, it gets as ugly as the Tennessee game. Though in defense of Caleb Williams, everybody obviously wants to talk about the sensational job that Gene Daniels has done to this point in the season. Caleb Williams has gotten better every single week. He had his best game of the season last week against the LA Rams. I think the Bears, again, they know they're going to Jacksonville next week in London. They're playing the Jags. This is one of the easiest games of their schedule. They're 2-2 in a very tough division. They will already know the result of the Minnesota game by the time this game kicks off. Green Bay plays later in the day. Detroit is on a bye. The Bears, they cannot lose this game. Or talk radio in Chicago is going to go crazy. Not going to bet it. They're favored by 3.5, which, believe it or not, is the fourth biggest spread on the board this weekend. Raiders at Broncos. Denver favored by 2.5. I'm going to take them to win the game. This is an AFC West battle. Anything can happen. We know Devontae Adams is requesting a trade from Vegas. I don't love the vibes there in Vegas. It just seems like something is off. I think even though the Raiders are 2-2, they know that they don't have the quarterback of the future. They're going to try to trade Devontae Adams and get some assets. I've seen a potential scenario where they essentially swap Hassan Reddick to the Raiders, which obviously next to Max Crosby would create one L of a pass rush combo for the future, and then you can build off that. And then you can go out, you can draft another receiver if you want to cheap. Jacoby Myers is still there. We really like Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers at the tight end positions. But this is all about the quarterback. And Bo Nix did throw the only touchdown in the game last week against the Jets. When the weather has been clean, he's been decent. He got better. The Raiders defense isn't exactly a world beater defense. I think at home here, Denver gets the win. The next game is my survivor pick of the week. I think it's just going to be really tough for Danny Nichols to go into Seattle and win. Seattle's second biggest favorite of the weekend. They're 6.5 point favorites against the Giants. The way the NFL has gone this year, history is telling you take the Giants with the points at 6.5. I'm just not going to do it. I think Seattle's a very hard place to play. I think the Giants, Malik Neighbors is going to have to be essentially great, and he is questionable to play in this game. And if they don't have him, this spread could balloon, and this could be a blowout in favor of Seattle. We've seen Seattle's ability to beat up on bad teams this year. The Giants are a bad team. Give me Seattle. I am surprised that this is the biggest spread of the weekend. You got San Francisco minus 7.5. They're taking on Arizona. San Francisco is getting healthier. Now, Arizona, this is a divisional rivalry game, and they, got embarrassed the last 2 weeks at home by the Lions and then by Washington, and that was after embarrassing the Rams in week 2. This is only their second road game of the year. They played very well in the first half against Buffalo. I suspect Kyler Murray is going to want to come out. He's going to want to play well. I mean, this football team right now is 1-3. They probably could be 2-2. And there was expectations before the year for this team to potentially get to 8-9 wins. We know the weapons they have. My question is going to be, can they hold up defensively against that San Francisco offense? Jonathan Gannon's played against it now, obviously a couple times in Arizona, played against it in the NFC Championship game as the defensive coordinator of Philadelphia. I'm not going to call the upset, but at 7.5, I'll tell you this. I wouldn't be surprised either way. I wouldn't be surprised if Arizona pulls out the upset or at least makes this a very close game down to the wire. I also wouldn't be surprised if San Francisco blows them out. For that reason, I'm staying away. Packers at Rams. Now, the Rams are desperate, right? They're 1-3. They're beat up all to hell. They're 3-point dogs at home. Seattle is likely to go to 4-1 on the year. That win against San Francisco might have saved their season because they could have been 0-4 at this point and probably 0-5 because the weirdest stat potentially of the year so far is Jordan Love is 0-2. Malik Willis is 2-0 for the Green Bay Packers. And I think the Packers, again, they're going to know the result of the Vikings game. by the time they kick off. If Minnesota does beat the Jets, there is a lot of urgency on the Green Bay side. You don't want to fall 3 games behind Minnesota, including the wash right now in the tiebreaker, which would put you at 4 games back and essentially eliminate you from the division already. Um, with that in mind, again, I think the Rams, without Puka Nacua, without Cooper Kupp, they've been doing their best. They still don't have their offensive line back either. The defense not getting as much pressure without Aaron Donald on the front line. I think Green Bay, Jordan Love, they need to have their best game of the year. Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, they know each other so well. They worked on staffs together in Washington. I believe Mike LaFleur, Matt's brother, is now with McVay in Los Angeles. I think the Packers just need the game more because I think at this point, the Rams season, just due to injuries, them and the Dolphins seasons are kind of already over just because of injuries. Green Bay's trying to keep their season afloat. And for all intents and purposes, again, if they lose this game, Minnesota wins, Green Bay's looking at the wild card. Now, my final best bet, I'm taking Pittsburgh on Sunday night, -1.5 to win and cover against Dallas. You know, my rule with the Steelers is to generally take them as dogs, don't take them as favorites. But what have we seen from Dallas this year? They beat up on a Browns team who their offensive line is in shambles. They lost to New Orleans. They lost to Baltimore. Then they came back and they barely beat the Giants. Yes, they did better in the run game, but again, as I've been talking about, they contained Jerome Ford and Devin Singletary. They could not contain Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. I think Arthur Smith is going to get Najee Harris going in this game. They have struggled with mobile quarterbacks so far this season, specifically Lamar Jackson running around. I think you're going to see a lot of playmaking from Justin Fields. We know this is one of the oldest rivalries in the book. And again, Mike Tomlin coming off a loss. I think he's going to have these guys prepared. Dallas, outside of CeeDee Lamb, doesn't have a lot of reliable weapons, as we've talked about. I like Jake Ferguson. He's not great. Pittsburgh has been essentially good against the run this year. I think they forced Dak Prescott to drop back a lot of times. TJ Watt is going to get in on that Dallas offensive line that is younger than what it has been in years past and has struggled a little bit more than what it's done in years past. Steelers win. They cover the 1.5. And then you got Monday night. Saints at Taylor Swift and the Kansas City Chiefs, who are favored by 5.5. New Orleans has lost 2 in a row. Kind of feel like that they're smoke screen after destroying the Cowboys in week 2, losing to Philly and losing to Atlanta in the fashion that they did. They did not give up an offensive touchdown. But even without Rashid Rice, now they have Kareem Hunt back. I think Xavier Worthy is going to become more involved in the offense, and we could potentially see Travis Kelce get going. We saw what Dallas Goedert did to the Saints in week 3. New Orleans is not very good against the tight end. And I just think Patrick Mahomes at home in prime time, very hard to bet against. The Saints are good defensively. I don't know if Quinn Kubiak and crew, if they're going to be able to catch Spagnuolo off guard. The Chiefs defense has been maybe the best defense in football throughout the first 4 weeks of the season. Kansas City wins and more than likely cover. But again, at 5.5 this year, history says take the dogs, and I think there's better bets on the board, which is why I will not be betting it. So, to recap, I have on Thursday night, I have Atlanta knocking off Tampa Bay. I have the Jets in London defeating the Vikings. I have the Browns on the road defeating Commanders. Cincinnati at home over Baltimore. New England at home over Miami. Houston at home over Buffalo. Jacksonville at home over Indy. Chicago at home over Carolina. Denver at home over Vegas. Seattle at home over the Giants. San Francisco at home over Arizona. I like Green Bay on the road against the Rams. I like Pittsburgh at home against Dallas. And I like Kansas City at home Monday night against the Saints. My 5 best bets for week 5 of the 2024 NFL season are: I like Atlanta at home to weigh the 1.5 they cover against Tampa Bay on Thursday night. I like the Jets going over the pond in London. They're getting 2.5 against the Vikings. I like Cincinnati at home to cover the plus 2.5 and win as an underdog against the Baltimore Ravens. I like New England in an ugly one to cover the 1.5. They will take the points. They will beat the Dolphins. And then I like the Steelers here. They're laying 1.5, favored it at home against Dallas. I like them. Like that clip from the Brand's World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brand's World podcast right here on YouTube.